Shalom, my name is Yaakov, Jacob. And someone gave you this tape because you are Jewish, and they were interested in speaking to you about the relationship between Christianity and Judaism. I know Jewish people are revolted by Jews who believe in Jesus, so you can rest assured my mother is a Gentile, Roman Catholic. She doesn't believe what I believe, but I am not halakhically Jewish. My wife and children, however, are. Now, I grew up in New York area, and I was both sent to a Roman Catholic school and the Jewish Community Center. I had Brit Milah, plus I was sprinkled as a baby. By the time I became a teenager, I was an agnostic. By the time I became a teenager, I didn't know what I believed. I just know what I didn't. But I had an open mind. Now, I always had a sense of identity with Israel and the Jewish people, but I was not halakhically Jewish, and I rejected Roman Catholicism as something idolatrous and corrupt. So I'm speaking to you as a Jewish person. And I'd like you to understand why I, as a Christian, am philo-Semitic, why I support Israel and the Jewish people. But this inevitably leads to the question, why did I bring up my Jewish children to believe that Jesus is a Jew who had a Jewish message, taught in a Jewish way for Jewish people? If you want to look at what's revolting about Christendom, its ugly history of idolatry and anti-Semitism, I'm with you, my Jewish friend, 100%. They took a Jewish faith and they turned it into a Hellenistic, a Greek, even a pagan faith. They took a Jewish Messiah and turned him into a Goy. They took a Jewish rabbi and made him an icon of anti-Semitic sentiment. What they did was not rational, and it was completely out of harmony with who he was and what he taught. We have to draw a distinction between the Jewish Jesus and the Jesus of Western Christendom. The Jewish Jesus was called Rabbi Yeshua bar Yosef mi Nazareth. His name was not Jesus Christ. His name was Rabbi Yeshua bar Yosef mi Nazareth. He said, I came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. You may be surprised to know that every writer of the New Testament was a Jew. The only exception would have been one physician who was a Gentile convert to Judaism who wrote one book. All the rest were Jewish, including Rabbi Shaul of Tarsus, who was from the rabbinic school of Hillel, a disciple of Rabbi Gamaliel, a classmate of Ankvios, a classmate of Yochanan ben Zakkai. In Judaism, if you're familiar and have been to yeshiva, you perhaps know. And so I'm left with this dilemma. I was brought up in what I was told was Christianity, but reading the New Testament, I found out it was not Christianity. And then there was a Judaism that I was told was the same Judaism as Moses and the prophets. So it's the same as I read the Brit HaDashah, the New Testament, and I discovered that the New Testament was not what Jesus taught. I needed to do the same thing with the Tanakh, the Hebrew Scriptures. It says in Proverbs 3 times that an unequal balance is an abomination to Hashem. So the same as I discovered that Christianity had mutated into something very different than it was originally, much the same happened to Judaism. I was shocked to discover that in the Tanakh, there was no such thing as a rabbi. He's called Moshe Rabbeinu, but there was no rabbi. there were Levites, priests. And in the New Testament, there were no priests. It's something they invented. There were presbyters, elders, but there were no priests. Christ was the priest. Every Christian was supposed to be a priest, not a separate priesthood. So there was no priest in the New Testament and no rabbis in the Old. I began to understand why that Jewish man, Karl Marx, said religion was a con. But I looked further. And I came up with questions. Questions that I asked myself and questions I would like to ask you. The first question I would like to ask you is this. There are two reasons most Jewish people I know, neighbors, friends, family, two reasons most I know reject any idea of Jesus being the Jewish Messiah. Those reasons are always anti-Semitism and why, if he was the Messiah, did he not bring in worldwide peace? Therefore, he could not be the Messiah. Let's begin with the most sensitive of issues, anti-Semitism. I had an uncle who was in a German camp. He was a prisoner of war. Nazis were going to kill him. He was rescued by the Russians at the last moment, as my wife's father was rescued by the Russians at the last moment when he was against the wall about to be shot. The Germans were trying to kill as many Jews as they could before they evacuated and retreated in the face of the oncoming invasion. My wife is the daughter of Holocaust survivors. Most of her family were murdered. And of course, they were murdered in the name of Jesus Christ. The Romanian Orthodox Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and much of the Lutheran Church in Germany collaborated with the Nazis. Hitler quoted Luther at length. It was not just Catholics, it was Protestants. How can I believe that the person in whose name one inquisition after another, one pogrom after another, and ultimately the Holocaust should be even considered as a possible candidate to be the Jewish Messiah, when in his name nothing but genocidal extermination and persecution has come to Israel and the Jews? That's the question I ask myself. But this is the question I would like to ask you. If you were to read the Tanakh, Yirmiyahu Hanavi, Jeremiah the prophet, was arrested and thrown into a cistern. He pointed people to the law, the Torah. He warned them of impending doom and judgment and God's anger with them because of idolatry and immorality. And like most of the other prophets, he was persecuted. But he was not persecuted in the name of Baal. He was not persecuted in the name of Molech. Most of the Hebrew prophets who were persecuted or murdered by their own people were murdered in the name of Yahweh and Moses. They were accused of speaking against the Torah and Moses when they said God's judgment was going to come on Jerusalem. I recall several years ago when an Orthodox Jew wearing a yarmulke drew a pistol in North Tel Aviv and fired bullets directly into the back of the Israeli Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin. He did this in the name of Judaism. He did this in the name of the Torah. He did this in the name of Yahweh. He did this in the name of Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu. An Orthodox Jew assassinated Yitzhak Rabin, gunned him down, murdered his own prime minister in the name of Moses and Judaism. Can I reject Moses and Judaism because somebody assassinated Yitzhak Rabin in his name? Can I reject Moses and Judaism because the prophets were persecuted and killed in their name? Simon Bar Kokhba came and was extolled as a hero. He was proclaimed to be the Messiah by Rabbi Akiva in the name of Moses and the prophets. The Israeli general and archaeologist, the first chief of staff of the Israeli military, Yigal Allon, said something different. He described Bar Kokhba as something of a brute tyrant who once kicked a 90-year-old rabbi in the head and killed him. A warlord. Someone who had been power hungry. Some saw him that way, but Rabbi Akiva said he was the Messiah. And in the name of Moses and Judaism, Rabbi Akiva promised the Jewish people he was the Messiah and would bring them deliverance. And in the Battle of Betar, the worst Holocaust in proportionate terms that has ever happened to Israel took place. Something in proportionate terms as bad as the Holocaust of the 1930s and 40s, only it happened in their own land. Because Rabbi Akiva proclaimed Bar Kokhba to be the Messiah, in the name of Moses and Judaism, can I reject Moses and Judaism? No, Rabbi Akiva did not bring peace to Israel and establish worldwide peace through his Messiah, Bar Kokhba. Bar Kokhba did not establish worldwide peace and bring peace to Israel. Even though in the name of Moses and Judaism they said he would. If you study Judaism, you know about Shabbat Tzvi. Most rabbis in major areas of Europe and North Africa, most in major areas, and many others in a variety of areas, said he was the Messiah. But he was not a Messiah. In the end, he led the people into what can best be described as something debaucherous and grossly disappointing. Yet it was in the name of Moses and the prophets that the rabbis proclaimed Shabbat Tzvi to be the Messiah. Can I reject Moses and Judaism because the rabbis misled the Jewish people into following Shabbat Tzvi in the name of Moses and Judaism? 2 generations later, the rabbis did it again. And they said Jacob Frank was the Messiah on a wide scale. But Jacob Frank was not the Messiah, yet in the name of Moses and Judaism, the rabbis said he was. And some very bad things happened to the Jewish people. There have been many people who the rabbis have said is the Messiah, right up to the present age. And they always proclaim them to be the Messiah in the name of Moses and Judaism. Murder and atrocity was committed in the name of Moses and Judaism. Genocidal persecution of the Jews resulted as a direct result of Rabbi Akiva's action, perpetrated in the name of Moses and Judaism. On what basis can I reject Moses and Judaism because of what was done in the name of Moses? I cannot reject Moses and Judaism because of what was done in the name of Moses. I have to accept or reject Moses on the basis of what Moses said and did, not on the basis of what others said and did in his name. The issue is not what was done in the name of Moses, the issue is Moses. So then, my question to you is, on what basis can I reject Yeshua, Rabbi Yeshua Bar Yosef ben Etzedet, who the Gentiles called Jesus of Nazareth? On what basis can I dismiss him and reject him on the basis of what was done in his name to the Jewish people and to others? The issue is not what was done and said in his name by others. The issue is, what did he say and do? The issue is not what Jesus is said to have said. The issue is not what others did generations and centuries after his public ministry in Israel. The issue is not what others said and did in his name. The issue is not that. The issue is him himself. I considered Moses apart from what was done in his name. Now you don't think of it, but goys, Gentiles, will say much the same thing about you that you think about them. They have these myths of conspiracy theories and Jewish bankers and Jewish merchants and Jews trying to take over the medical profession and the academic institutions, making Jews the scapegoats for most of man's faults and problems, when in fact we all know there are both good Jews and bad Jews, the same as there are both good Gentiles and bad Gentiles. But it's easy just to say, oh, the Jews. And it's just as easy to say, oh, the Christians. No real Jew would commit murder in the name of Judaism. No real Jew would persecute their own prophets in the name of Judaism. No real Christian would commit murder in the name of Christianity. No real Christian would murder God's own chosen people, the Jews, in the name of a Jewish faith. Christianity is a Jewish faith. How can you reject Jesus on the basis of what was done in his name unless you reject Moses on the same grounds? I don't reject Moses for those reasons. It wouldn't be fair to Moses, and it wouldn't be fair to myself. The issue is, was Moses right? I hope you won't reject Jesus on those grounds. It wouldn't be fair to him, and it wouldn't be fair to you. The issue is, was Yeshua right? Not the Gentile Jesus, not the Catholic or the Protestant Jesus. The Jewish Jesus, was he right? By the 2nd century, the Jewish historian Max Dimon tells us that up to 25% of the Jews in Jerusalem believed he was the Messiah. The only reason Gentiles believe in him is because Jews believed it first. The only reason there's a New Testament is because Jews wrote it. Both those calling themselves Jews and those calling themselves Christians are the products of revisionism, a rewritten distortion of history. There is nothing Gentile about Jesus or his message, except that he loves Gentiles and wants to save them and wanted them to believe in the Jewish God and the Jewish way of salvation. That is all. Or the Goyim, alike to the Gentiles. That's my first question, my dear Jewish friend. How can you reject Jesus because of what was done in his name when the same things were done in the name of Moses and Judaism? But there's another question I'd like to ask you. That question is, if Jesus was the Messiah, why didn't he bring in worldwide peace? Why was there a Holocaust? Why were there inquisitions and pogroms? Why is there starvation in Africa? Why is the environment being destroyed? Why has the world become systematically worse for everybody in it? And so commonly, the Jews getting the worst of the worst. How could he be the Messiah? Why didn't he bring in worldwide peace? Where is the Messianic redemption? It's ridiculous to believe he's the Messiah. The world wouldn't be the way it is. Things have only gotten worse for us. How can you believe in him? That's the question. Let's turn not to any Christian source, not to any Gentile source, not to any human source. Let's turn to the Word of God, the Hebrew prophet Daniel, chapter 9. Daniel Hanavi. In Daniel chapter 9, we read verses 26 and 27. המשיח תצטרך לבוא ולמות לפני החורבן של בית המקדש השנית וקרה ב70 אחרי הספירה. המשיח תצטרך לבוא כבר. The Messiah would have to come and be cut off, be killed before the destruction of the second temple. But that's your Christian interpretation. No, I'm not looking at Christian interpretations. That's what the text says, and try reading Sanhedrin 96 to 98b. Why do the rabbis say there's a curse on reading Daniel 9? For the time of the Messiah's coming is foretold in it. And as we read, and the Sanhedrin wept, oi, oi, the Messiah has come.
Hallelujah.
No, the temple is destroyed and he's not come. Woe unto us. God cannot break his word. The ancient sages understood this was about the Messiah. He had to come and die. Wars and desolations are determined to the end. In Judaism, the rabbis go to the greatest lengths to try to reconcile two irreconcilable pictures of the Messiah. Hamashiach ben Yosef and Hamashiach ben David, Messiah the son of Joseph, Messiah the son of David. The conquering king and the suffering servant we call Ben Ephraim. Some rabbis said one will resurrect the other. It's two Messiahs. Is it two Messiahs or one Messiah with two comings? Daniel was right. It was one Messiah with two comings. He was shown the future. This is what Moses spoke of. This is how it will happen. He will come. He will be cut off. He will be killed. Wars and desolations are determined until the end. Then he will come again. In his first coming, he comes as a suffering servant in the character of Yosef from Bereshit, in the book of Genesis. When you think of Joseph in the book of Genesis, his own Jewish brothers rejected him, but the Goys accepted him. He went from a place of condemnation to exaltation in a single day, as did Rabbi Yeshua. Yosef was betrayed by his brother Yehuda for 20 pieces of silver, as Jesus was betrayed by Yehuda, Judas, for 30 pieces of silver. Joseph's brothers did not recognize him at the first coming. They thought he was a Goy, an Egyptian. And so Jesus' brothers recognized him at the second coming. They think he's a Goy. He's for the Christians. Hollywood gave him blonde hair and blue eyes, but he did not have blonde hair and blue eyes. My question is this. If the Hebrew prophet, who was given the clearest picture of what the future would be like, if he was given the most accurate detail of how the messianic redemption would come to Israel and to the world, if he said the Messiah would come and be cut off and wars and desolations will be determined to the end, how can you say Jesus was not the Messiah because there's wars and desolations? That's supposed to have happened. Think of Moses. The first time he tried to save his people, they rejected him. It was the second time they accepted him. As with Joseph. The first time they rejected him. The second time they accepted him. Why should the Messiah be any different? The Hebrew scriptures do not say he will bring in worldwide peace. It says he will come and bring in an atonement. It says he will come and be cut off. It says wars and desolations will be determined until the end. Then he will come and bring in worldwide peace. In his first coming, he came to pay the price for the sin that prevents the peace from coming. In his return, he will bring the peace. Shalom al kol Israel. I don't understand the argument. How can you say he's not the Messiah because he didn't bring in worldwide peace but was killed, when that's exactly what Daniel said the Messiah was supposed to do? Why don't the rabbis tell you this? I'm afraid you'll have to ask them. I'm not a rabbi. But I know what their ancient rabbis said. Don't read Daniel 9. There's a curse if you do. What are they afraid of? Can you really believe that God would have put something in His Word that He didn't want you to understand? Why would He put it there? There was a rabbi who hated Christians because he had known nothing but persecution in Eastern Europe. His family had been terribly persecuted. His name was Rabbi Leopold Cohen. Only once in his life did he ever see a New Testament, and he picked it up and threw it against the wall in violent anger because of the pogroms his people had experienced in the shtetls of Eastern Europe. In desperation to flee the anti-Semitism, he arrived in New York City. And there he began to study and study and study. He always studied Torah and he studied Talmud. He studied Mishnah. He read the Midrashim. But he decided instead of studying rabbinic commentary on the prophets, he would study the prophets. And when he came to Daniel 9, he had questions he could not answer. So he went to the Talmudic literature. He went to the tractates, like Sanhedrin. And he discovered what I discovered. The Messiah had to come and die before the second temple would be destroyed, before 70 AD. That's my question. If Rabbi Yeshua, Jesus, only did what the Messiah was prophesied as going to have to do, how can you reject him on the basis of having fulfilled the prophecy? You can reject somebody on the basis of having not fulfilled the prophecy, but how can you logically, rationally, as a Jew before God, reject him on the basis of fulfilling what he was supposed to? But I have another question. Yeshayahu Hanavi, Isaiah, the prophet, in chapter 11 said, the nations will resort to the root of Jesse, the Shoresh Ishai. The peoples, the Amin. The rabbis have always said the Shoresh Ishai is the Messiah. Jews and Christians, their scholars, have always agreed. The nations, the Gentiles, the peoples will come to the root of Jesse. I look at an anti-Semitic world. I look at a world where, for becoming a Christian in Saudi Arabia, somebody is beheaded or hung. A world where in Sudan, nearly 2.5 million Christians have already been killed and more facing the prospect of death. Yet Gentile so-called Christian nations remain almost silent. No one calling for a boycott on Saudi Arabian oil or an academic boycott on the many nations that persecute Christians, Islamic countries. But when the one nation in the Middle East that protects the rights of Arab Christians, Israel, the one nation that protects the rights of Arab Christians, defends themselves from the same militant Islam that murders Christians, everybody wants to condemn Israel. It's not logical, it's not rational. Israel is treating most Christians, apart from Jewish ones, apart from Jewish believers in Jesus, they treat most Christians better than Christians treated them, except in the United States, and to a degree in Britain. Most nations have never given Jews the kind of freedom that Israel gives to Christians. It's not rational that they hate Israel. It's not rational to hate a people who received 3/4 of the Nobel Prizes for the advancement of science, chemistry, physics, and especially biomedical sciences that have saved countless lives. Why would you hate these people? It's not rational. All over the world, there's anti-Semitism. Even people saying they're Christian, there's anti-Semitism. Although all 4 Gospels make it clear that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate, the Roman government has legal responsibility for his death. And although Jesus said, I lay my life down, nobody takes it from me. And although Christians believe that God said he was going to put the Messiah to death as an atonement for sin, although Jesus never blamed anybody for his death, and although the apostle said it was the Roman government together with the Sanhedrin, but it was not the Jewish people, Although blaming the Jews for the death of Jesus is directly contrary to history and to the teaching of the New Testament, they're still saying the Jews killed Jesus. It's not rational. No, this anti-Semitism is not rational. But there's something even more irrational. We hate you, Jew. You're a kike. You're a yit. You're a sheeny. Get out of here. We hate you. You're no good. We don't want you in your land. And if you go to your own land, you have no right to be there either. You have no right to exist. But we're going to worship your God. We hate you. But we love your Messiah. We're going to follow your Messiah. Why will Eskimos worship a Jewish God? Why will Pygmies worship a Jewish God? Why will Scandinavians worship a Jewish God? It makes no sense. If you hate these people, why do you worship their God? Because the nations will resort to the root of Jesse. My question, my dear Jewish friends, is this. You and I both hate anti-Semitism. You and I are at a loss to explain it, at least intellectually. We can come up with some explanations, but the entire history of it coming back to the same thing again, and it's not logical. But if you hate somebody, why will you follow one of them? Why will you believe their books and worship their God? There's only one and one alone who could make people worship the God of a nation and race they otherwise hate. Now, I'm not saying true Christians, born-again Christians, real evangelicals, I'm not saying that they hate the Jewish people. If you look at the countries with a high evangelical population, you'll find even in the Holocaust it was countries like Holland and so forth and Denmark that protected the Jews. It was mainly the Catholic and nominal Protestant countries that persecuted them. The American Jewish Congress, the American College of Rabbis knows very well that the backbone of Jewish support for Israel and America is not the Jewish community. There's only 6 million in North America at most. It is the evangelical Christians who are pro-Zionist. Most of them. Not all Christians are anti-Semitic. You see, the same as there are people who will hate you because you're a Jew, claiming to be Christian, there are other Christians who will love you because you're a Jew. They will say, how can we worship a Jewish God and believe in a Jewish Messiah and read a Jewish book and stake our eternal destiny, our faith on it, and hate these people who gave it to us? They're not all irrational. But you shouldn't be irrational either. Many people calling themselves Christians are behaving irrationally. They're worshiping a Jewish God and believing in a Jewish Messiah while hating Jews. It's irrational. But don't you be an irrational Jew. It's a rational question that deserves a rational answer. If he is not the Messiah who would make the Gentiles worship your God, who is? Why else do they worship your God if he is not the one who God said would make them do it? But I have another question. Also from the Hebrew prophet Isaiah, Ishayahu Hanavi, Isaiah 52 and 53. He said, Kulanu kansantayenu. All we like sheep have gone astray. Each has turned to his own way. In the Middle Ages, a rabbi from France called Rashi said that this was about the Jewish people suffering for the Gentile nations, a vicarious atonement. It wasn't about the Messiah, it was about the Jews themselves. Who has believed our report? To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of parched ground. He had no stately form of majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him. He was despised and forsaken among men. A man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, like one from whom men hide their face. He was despised, we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs he himself bore, our sorrows he carried. We ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. He was pierced through, as in crucified, for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening of our well-being fell upon him. By his scourging we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. Each has turned to his own way, but the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall upon him. The rabbis say this is about the suffering Jewish people, since Rashi. Why is it that the Targum Yonatan and the ancient rabbis before Rashi said it was about the Messiah? Why did Rabbi Avraham Farazel say, this looks like Jesus? Before Rashi they didn't say that. This was included by Eliezer HaKalir in the synagogue liturgy for Yom Kippur. This one who God would smite, who would become an atonement for sin, a korban, a human sacrifice. Yet to this the rabbis object. Judaism, since the Akedah, is against human sacrifice. It was an abomination. Why would God have somebody sacrifice as a human when he said it was evil? And the Akedah, God told Abraham, don't sacrifice your son. And Christians would of course say it was because he was going to sacrifice his. The rabbis say human sacrifice is anti-Jewish. I agree that human sacrifice to other gods is demonic. However, the same Rashi who said this is about the Jewish people said it is a human sacrifice. He said it is a human sacrifice. He said it's the Jews suffering vicariously for the Gentile nations. We can't have it both ways. Either Judaism does allow humans to suffer vicariously for the sins of others, or it doesn't. Rashi and those who believe Jesus to be the Messiah agree. It does. How can you say God does not allow a human sacrifice for sin on behalf of someone else when the Jewish interpretation itself says it is? The question is, who was suffering? Was it Israel or was it the Messiah? Well, Isaiah repeatedly castigated Israel for its sin. This servant of the Lord was innocent. He had done no wrong, Isaiah says. He'd done no wrong at all. He was cut off out of the land of the living for the transgression of my people to whom the stroke was due. The Gentiles were not God's people at that time. He was cut off for the sake of Israel's sin. It came to the Gentiles afterwards. How could it be Israel? What Israel had sinned. In a broad sense, it resembles Israel. But this was a sinless servant. The question is not who was right, the Christians or Rashi. The question is who was right, Rashi or the earlier rabbis who said it was the Messiah. It is the Messiah. It's not a question of who's right, the Christians or Rashi. It's a question of which rabbi do you believe? That is my question. How could it be the Jewish people primarily if they had sinned? How could it be the Jewish people suffering for the sins of the Gentiles? When they had sinned, this was a sinless servant. And how can you say that God would not let one die for the sin of another when Judaism itself says the direct contrary? But I have a final question. I'm going to read from the Hebrew prophet Zechariah, chapter 12. We read of the burden of the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Thus declares the Lord, who stretches out the heavens, who lays the foundations of the earth and forms the spirit of man within him. I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes reeling to all the peoples around, and when the siege is against Jerusalem, it'll be against Judah. And it will come about on that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples, and all who lift it will be grievously injured. and all the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. The issue is Jerusalem, the final status of Jerusalem. Not the West Bank, not the Gaza Strip, not the Golan Heights. Jerusalem is the issue. All the nations will come against it? When the Chinese massacred between 7,000 and 8,000 students, witnessed by over 1 billion people on television in Tiananmen Square, how many UN resolutions were passed condemning China? None. When the Muslims massacred 2.3 million black Christians in Sudan, Islamic militias, how many UN resolutions? How many Security Council resolutions? How many calls for boycotts on Sudan? None. 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 How many UN resolutions passed against Israel? How many Security Council resolutions passed against? 50% of all resolutions in the General Assembly and more than 50% in the Security Council. Go ahead. Kill a couple of million blacks, who cares? They're poor, they're black, and they have no oil. Go into the Gaza Strip to stop people from shooting Katyusha rockets and killing your children. The world wants to condemn you. Makes no sense. But how will this end? Zechariah tells us in this chapter, in verse 10. Verse 9, it'll come about on that day, I will set about to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. They will look upon me who they have pierced, crucified, and mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. Who said so? Jacob Prasch? No. Try Rabbi Moshe Elshech. Read what the sages said about this and who it was. They'll look upon him pierced and mourn as one mourns for an only son. The one we rejected, the one whose name we spit at, the one we cursed, is the one who's come to save us. Yes, he is coming to save you. That is my question. If he is the one who fulfilled these prophecies, if he had to come and die already, if he was the atonement for your sin, if he's the one who's coming to save Israel, and he's the one who's already come to save you, do you want to be saved? How can anybody call this rejecting Judaism? That is my question. How can rejecting a Jewish Messiah who taught a Jewish thing in a Jewish way to Jewish people and made non-Jews believe in a Jewish God and read a Jewish book and believe a Jewish book, how can anybody call that non-Jewish, anti-Jewish, or departing from Judaism? It may be a departure from what people did to Judaism. It may be a departure from the Judaism responsible from the assassination of Rabin. It may be a departure from the Judaism that proclaimed Bar Kokhba to be the Messiah. But it is not a departure from the Judaism of your fathers, of the patriarchs, of Moses and the prophets. HaMashiach yiftzarek lavo v'lamut lifnei ha'chorban shel bet hamikdash hashenit. Lisbol b'sirenu bimkom amo. הוא יצטרך לבוא כבר, והוא יבוא עוד פעם בחזרה, בעתיד קרוב. השאלה שלי עכשיו היום, מה אתם חושבים? הוא כן או הוא לא משיחנו? ככה השאלה. My dear Jewish friend, you turn from sin, you make teshuvah, you ask the God of your fathers to forgive your sin, that Yeshua paid for in his death. In his resurrection, he rose to give you eternal life. Yes, he did raise. Who said so? Jacob Prasch? No. Try reading The Resurrection of Jesus by Rabbi Pinchas Lapid, Orthodox professor, Hebrew University. Try reading Rabbi David Flusser, Orthodox professor, Hebrew University. From a Jewish perspective, the resurrection of Jesus is irrefutable. The idea that a Messiah would come and die, then raise again, that's what the Chabad say about Schneerson. Only Schneerson didn't raise from the dead. The rabbis say he raised from the dead. Jesus came and he would die at Pesach, and after dying at Pesach, he rose from the dead. His rabbis didn't like him, but said, he did miracles as no other rabbi, and his disciples did miracles in his name, including raising others from the dead. Coming to die at Pesach, raising from the dead, doing miracles, his disciples doing miracles, and then ascending to heaven from the Mount of Olives. From where do I quote? The Gospels? No, I quote from the Avodat Zarah. That was not written by Jews who believed in Jesus. That was written by rabbis who were against Jews believing in Jesus. When your followers admit these things, it's one thing. When your opponents say it's true, it's something else. Is he the Messiah? Yes, he is. It's your decision. Please, come on our website, www.moriel.org. Email us. Write us here in Britain, Moriel Post Office Box 201, Maidenhead, SL6 9FB. Please contact us. Please email us. Please talk to us. We want you to meet other Jewish people that have found the truth. The truth is, the Tanakh was right. The prophets were right. The Messiah has come. The Messiah has died for sin. He has risen from the dead and conquered death. And he's coming again. Sei gesund.